part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey, this is your host, Don Mike Mendoza for Producing While Asian, and welcome to today's episode. Our conversation is with Angela Chan, who is a multi-talented artist who composes, is a lyricist, is a producer, is a teaching artist, and also a graphic designer. She is the creator of the Cre8sian Project, and she's here to talk about that, about her career, and about representation matters and all of the things under the sun, and how also, especially how we can help battle Asian hate in this very critical time during the pandemic. So I hope you enjoy today's episode, and welcome again to Producing While Asian. Hello, Angela. Welcome to Producing While Asian. It's so good to have you on.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So how's your day going so far?
Oh, it's just starting out here on the West Coast.
That's nice. I'm already in my afternoon and out on the East Coast. I'm like, oh, I have so much less time. So, but it's so good to have you. And I'm excited to talk about all of the projects you're working on and what's going on your side of the world. And so let's start with kind of talking a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are, so our audience can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So I am a keyboard player. I am a music director, a composer, lyricist. I do audition prep. I officiate weddings. I do graphic design, and I've also produced a little bit. So my background is in piano, actually classically trained. I started playing when I was 4 years old, and I was in the competition circuit for a long time up till high school. My sophomore year, my piano teacher actually had a stroke. And so that's kind of when I started getting out of that.
Wow.
But for years I had a really strange relationship with music because I always had to practice all the time. And if you listen to my mother, I'm remembering my childhood wrong, but I used to have to practice an hour a day every day, and I had to log it. So I had to practice 6 hours a week, except for my lesson day. And so most of my childhood was spent practicing. And so, of course, like when you're a kid and you just want to go out and like do stuff, it's not the most fun thing to do. But I had a love-hate relationship with it because I really liked it. I really enjoyed music, and I really enjoyed playing. I didn't necessarily like the other things that came with it, but it was a huge part of my life growing up. I played the violin a little bit, the harp. I did French horn in band from middle school all the way up until my second year of college. And then when I got into high school, my last 2 years, I got into jazz band, which I thought was really cool. And so when I was getting towards the end of my high school years, I wanted to go into music, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, music was kind of all I'd ever known, and classical was all I'd ever known, but I didn't really know like if that was the route that I wanted to go, you know, because the only place for really classical musicians to go is really just competitions. And so when I was graduating, I applied to the School of Music at University of North Texas and went there on a classical piano performance scholarship. But I was still kind of lost, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't good enough at jazz to really be a jazz player. And I was not really into classical enough to be really in the classical department. So I was kind of there for a couple of years before my second year of college. Somebody just asked me to do a musical. A friend in my accompanying class had given my name to a high school drama teacher who was looking for someone to play for their production of Bye Bye Birdie. And I had no idea like what musicals were. We didn't go to musicals growing up. Like the only one I saw, I think professionally, was Phantom of the Opera my senior year of high school. And then I think my junior year of high school, like there was like a musical they did, Guys and Dolls. And I think I saw that, and I didn't really know what that was either. I certainly didn't know that that was a career path. Like I didn't know that they had piano players that did that. And so I didn't really think too much about that. But then once I started getting into it, that first show, like just so many things just clicked into place for me. Like, you know, I wasn't really like, there's something about having the music in tandem with the drama and in tandem with the dancing that just really kind of fed something that I really loved. And so I just kind of got really into it. And from there, like all of a sudden I was just nonstop doing musicals. And so from there, you know, I ended up graduating and doing summer stock. And then I actually ended up going out on the road touring with shows. And that was really interesting because when we say we play keyboards, it's not just playing just an electronic keyboard, which is what
Sure.
kind of some people think it
Yeah.
is. It's actually, you are kind of like the fill-in for the orchestra, because you're playing, like, you have to be able to play and kind of mimic the styles and like the timbres of, wind instruments, string instruments, percussion, keyboard instruments. Sometimes when it gets really crazy, the keyboard is also running lighting cues, which thankfully is
Wow.
rare. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's running a whole lot of other things that nobody ever told us about.
Yeah, that's
When you're
crazy.
getting trained. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so I did that for a while. I was on the road for about 6 years. And then when I was ready to get off, I moved to Las Vegas and I started playing for shows here in Las Vegas. And at some point, I just decided I met my husband now, and he's from Australia. And so we had gone down to Australia and they had the Australian Fringe Festival. And I was
Wow.
down there and I was like, their UNLV had done some series of concerts, and I was like, oh, these are not great. But the festival will take them, so they'll probably take anything. And so, like in my mind, I'm always trying to think of, as entertainers, there's a lot of expenses we can write off. And I thought, how can I find a way to write off our next trip to Australia? And so I thought, I could just
Got it.
create a show and we could do it down there and then we could write off the whole trip. Actually, I enlisted the help of a horn player that was at the Lion King that I had actually known for years before, when he was in touring and booking at the AFM office in New York. And he was interested in helping write the book. And so we got together and we wrote a kind of like a 1 hour, one act show called Legacy of the Tiger Mother, that was about the relationship between a mother and her daughter and the piano, and the role the piano played in kind of her childhood and growing up and their relationship. And we ended up taking that to 3 festivals. It was only intended to go to one, but we ended up taking it to 3 festivals, and I ended up producing the whole thing. So I was writing and creating it, but then I also ended up doing like the costume design. I found props. I was doing pretty much all the hats, like marketing, PR,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to have like a huge budget to do it, but also I was just trying to figure out how everything works, because that's also something that really interests me, is how do things work? Why do people do things? How can I do that? And so from there, like we were able to do the show in a festival in New York. We did it in the Adelaide Fringe, and we did it in the San Francisco Fringe, and we won a Best of Fringe Festival there, which was
Oh,
super
wow.
exciting. Yeah.
That's
And
great.
so that was kind of like my first kind of toe into producing things. And it was really exciting. It's a lot of work when
Yeah,
you're kind of like
for sure.
a one person operation and you don't really know what you're doing. And so, but that was really exciting. And then since then, like I do a lot of audition prep now for singers. If they have a packet, I lay down audition piano tracks for them to record with. I do a lot of vocal coaching with singers, which I really enjoy. And I work a lot with kids too, because I do a lot of volunteer work, because I think that it's so important for the arts to be in schools and for children to have access to it. And so not just for
Absolutely.
the appreciation, but just also for the future of the arts. Because if we don't expose,
Yeah.
the youth to that now, they're not going to know what they're missing. And once they see it, just to see how sometimes it lights sparks inside of them, I think is one of the most exciting things and one of the best gifts that we can give to the next generation going forward.
For sure. And it's interesting how you've kind of come full circle now, right? You started with piano lessons and now you're all the way back to volunteering and helping youth, which is really beautiful. That's awesome. I also love the part of your story where you talked about like an hour a day felt like the end of the world as a child. It's like, it's just like as adults, we're like, wow, it's just an hour. But like to a kid, that's like your whole life. You're like, an hour is so long. To do
I
it
know.
every day, is so much. But, this is great because I love these conversations because I learned so much about my guests where I didn't know that you were a lyricist and a composer and accompanist and music director and a writer and all of that. That's so cool. Like we, for our audience, we met because we were on the team for the now new Marahuyo Festival, which is an all Filipino arts celebration that happens every June now in Las Vegas that started in 2021. So Angela was on our team for kind of talking about the brand and trying to get all the initial check marks together, and it's coming back in 2022. And so I only knew you in that capacity, Angela. So it's really, really neat to hear all the other things because it just gives me 1 million more questions to ask you today about all the things that you do. Let's go to the other question that I ask everyone because you did touch on it yourself. So now knowing your story, on that scale that we have of 1 to producer, where 1 not at all, producer meaning I identify as, or anywhere in between, where do you sit on that scale depending on all of the things that you do in your life every day?
That's a great question. And that's it's such a broad scale because
Mhm.
it's so funny because I don't know exactly all of the things a producer does, but I do know that if I ever needed to get a show fully up off its feet from zero to getting it in front of an audience,
Right.
I can do it. So
For
I
sure.
feel like maybe I would probably fall in like a 5, 6 area.
Yeah.
I actually, during the pandemic, I took a graphic design course for like a 5-month course. So now I can also kind of design my own graphics and logos
Right.
and stuff
That's
like that.
awesome.
So yeah, because that was one piece that before, like I didn't know how to do. I wasn't really into like graphics and photoshopping. And throughout the pandemic, actually, I got really good at photoshopping. I did
That's
a,
great.
I did a, I did this thing called the Furlough Photoshop Challenge, which I started, I think maybe a few days into the shutdown, just as
Mhm.
something for fun, because when we first shut down in 2020, like no one knew how long it was going to be. So I thought, oh, I'll just do, I don't know, like 10 of these maybe. They said we'll be
Yeah.
home for 2 weeks. And I ended up keeping up for a whole year, a full 365 days of just
Wow.
doing photoshops. And I would just
Yeah.
Photoshop, sometimes I would just Photoshop other things into other photos. But then after a while, I started putting my face in other things. And it was
Mhm.
in a way, it was kind of cathartic because we talk about representation a lot, like we don't
Yeah.
see, enough Asians represented everywhere. And so I just started Photoshopping my face or my friends' faces into popular movie scenes, and
Mhm.
it doesn't look out of place. So I was like, it was, for me, is a little bit of a way to say, like, we belong in all these places. We could have been in all these movies. It doesn't look out of
Yeah.
place. And so 365 of those later, I've starred in
Mhm.
many movies according to my photoshopping.
This is awesome. And I saw a couple of those when we first became Facebook friends. I'm like, these are so great. And some of them are like really funny. So that's awesome. As in the producing world, that you're right. Like, there's no real definition of what a producer is, because at the end of the day, a producer is somebody who knows how to organize really well. And in terms of organizing, like organize human capital really well, like people and make relationships and all that. And so it takes a very special kind of person to do that, because like not everyone can deal with everybody, right? Like, it's a very acquired skill. But I admire that you've done so many fringe festivals, because I will say, as as a fellow producer, if and my piece of advice too is like, if anyone listening has not produced something in a fringe festival, you need to do that, because that is like the training ground, because you do exactly what you were talking about, Angela. You do everything. Like, you don't have a
Mm-hmm.
team, you don't have like a marketing director, you don't have like all these fun fancy positions. It's like literally you and like your friend, like, to
Yep.
put it all together. And so sometimes by yourself. And I think we all hopefully have cut our teeth a little bit on fringe. I've done that in DC a couple of times, and it's intense but worth it. You learn a lot.
Yeah. You
So
learn how to bump in and bump out really fast.
right, where they're like, you have 15 minutes to load in. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
Your
okay.
whole set, everything.
Right. And then
And it's
like
like
it's a
trying to
luxury
assign
if you
people.
right, like, and it's a luxury if you have a space where you can like store one box. And everyone's
Right?
like, oh great. So, and I also, in this pandemic, I think it's something that I'm seeing as a theme with everybody I talk to, is we've all discovered or at least honed another skill that we have. And, for you, it was graphic design. Like, it
Mhm.
weirdly gave us all time to do something else, even though it kind of came from a sad place of like our jobs coming to a
Yeah.
stop and all that. It gave us an opportunity to try something not necessarily different, but like complementary to what we already do. So I think that that's really great. So tell me, like, in your fringe journeys, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned through that time?
Ooh. Well, it's funny because like when we were traveling to all these things, like I had been being on the road touring on sometimes really small bus and truck tours really teaches you how to kind of compact and everything. Like I really love like gadgets and things that save time. I'm like super big on efficiency. And I'm super anal about organization, which is probably why like a lot of things,
That's why you're a
organizing things
producer.
suits me so well.
Right.
And I have my mother to thank for that because she is probably the most organized person that I know. Yeah, I feel like, like it's you have to know how to delegate, and you have to know kind of how to Tetris everything together. So when someone says you have a 2 foot by 3 foot space to store your entire set. The challenge becomes, okay, what can we do? How can we pack everything so that nothing is overweight? We can get it on a plane without paying $1,000 for luggage, like, and it's being resourceful too. It's like, all right, what do I have to take? What can I source there? Who can help us there? And what is the minimum number of people I need to get this done?
Right. Totally.
And so for me, like, probably one of the most helpful people that I had on my team was my props guy. I'd worked with him at Blue Man Group and at Lion King, and he's just a genius at creating things. He creates a lot of things here in Vegas for shows. And he's one of those people that I'd known for years because he had like a really great haunted house party, like every Halloween. He'd have like this garbage bag maze in his garage, and like a guillotine in his backyard, because everyone has those.
Why not? Right. Why not?
Because why not? And so when I said, hey, I need a prop that has to be the size of an upright piano, but I have to fit it in a suitcase, and it has to be lightweight enough where it's not going to, be damaged during a long plane ride. He was like, okay. And he created this piano that I'm telling you was a full size upright that we were able to use as a piano on one side, and we turn it around and it was just kind of like a prop table, like just on the set piece, but it was held together by hinges and pins. And it fit into a large suitcase, and it was under, I forget what the weight limit was, but it was underneath it. And so I feel like he made it out of, the first one was made out of wood, and then he remade it when we went to San Francisco, he remade it, I think, when we went to Australia, because it had to be lighter.
Yeah, right. To fit in the, weight limit that they've got.
Exactly. So it had to be sturdy, but also lightweight. And he made it happen. And it looked great. And we had it actually for years after the show. And, it's just like figuring out how to, like, I think we actually stayed here and we practiced, me and my team practiced like timing, like, all right, boom, boom, boom. Here's the pins. Here's how we take it out. Here's how it folds down. Here's how we fold it back into the suitcase. And what else can we fit in that suitcase?
Yeah. It's those time limits that get you, where they're like, you have to be out by this time, or like whatever. It's like intense. And so that's very, very cool. We weren't that sophisticated with our show, but I've definitely gained some like furniture pieces that I have still in my house from there's a nice bench that I have that's at the edge of my bed that was from IKEA that I'm like, I could use this, that we got for like, I don't know, $20 on, at the time, Craigslist, not Facebook Market.
Oh yeah.
Because that was like almost 10 years ago now.
For the Dennis Maniloff Show, I'll tap into my 40-plus years of following Cleveland sports and 30-plus years of writing and talking about them, so as to bring you informed opinions and analysis of your favorite players and teams. I also will monitor the national sports scene, and when warranted, step out of the toy department and into the real world. And I'll always be on the lookout for special guests. By all means, join us.
Hi, I'm Angela Chan, and this is Producing While Asian.
So I know earlier you touched a little bit on representation. And so that kind of gives me a good segue into my next question, which is kind of now going through or getting to this point in your career and kind of talking about representation in the sense of like having our youth see themselves in media. Talk to us about the Cre8sian Project. Cre8sian. Where did that come from? What was that idea? And kind of, where are you at now with that?
Sure. So the Cre8sian Project was an idea that I had that kind of had been in the back of my head. We all have those kind of little bubble ideas, and sometimes they come to fruition and sometimes they kind of sit and fester, and sometimes they never happen. But, like when we had done my show, The Legacy of the Tiger Mother, what kind of started that was I was working with a group here that was doing a show for, I think, Asian Heritage Month. And so we were trying to find like all the roles that we could, songs that we could do. And of course, there were not very many. And even then, like, we were like, okay, so we're like the 5 Asians in Las Vegas that are in the arts entertainment industry here, and it's like, why are there 5 of us? We all know each other. And even in the touring world, I think there was only maybe like at the time, like when I toured, like, keep in mind, like 20 years ago, there was still really only one Asian that I knew, maybe 1 or 2, and only one of them was a woman, and that was Faith Situ, and who's been on many, many tours. She's currently the music director conductor on the Frozen National Tour. And, she was the only one that I really knew. And so I was like, okay, so we know a sixth person, and then you topple that with, where women stand in the world too. It's just as being Asian and also a woman, just this country is just not kind to really either when it comes to opportunities. You feel like you always have to fight twice as hard. And so, keeping that in mind, often I would see young girls and even teenagers have really so low self-esteem because like they don't want to excel, or they don't want to seem like they're excelling because they don't want to not fit in. And I thought, why is that not cool? Like, why is it not cool to be successful? Like, why do we get labeled negatively if we're really determined, if we're really educated, if we're really motivated? How is it that that's different for women than it is for men? So, and we joked around about a little bit, like, among some friends about like, oh, so-and-so is a determination, and I thought, okay, that's funny, but why does that have to be a bad thing? How can I turn that narrative around so it's a good thing, it's a positive thing, something that we can be proud of? And so the seed for that kind of started there. And, I didn't really know what I wanted with it, but I just thought, how can we have something that empowers women? Like, we don't have any superheroes either. And so that's kind of where that idea sort of started. And it took a couple of years kind of sitting in the back of my head before I really was like, okay, I think I'm ready to go do something about it. And so I was talking to an old roommate of mine who is, I believe she's like a graphic designer and illustrator up in New York City. And I asked her if she was interested in doing something like that. And she said, you'll need an illustrator if you want to create characters. But she knew someone, and he works on Sesame Street, but he's an illustrator. He's also Asian. And I was like, awesome, I'd love to meet him. And so we met virtually over email, and he really knows a lot about superheroes, which was perfect.
Very cool. Yeah.
And so we were able to start that conversation. I believe I launched in 2020. So in probably the beginning of 2019, we started having a conversation. He was like, okay, send me kind of like your influences, like what do you want these to look like, style and everything. And so from there, he started doing sketches, and we kind of started developing them. The characters, we picked 4. So we've got determination, motivation, education, and concentration. So those are the ones that he thought spoke to him the most. And which I love, because like, I feel like they're really important qualities for being successful in the world. And so once we got those kind of fleshed out, it was great because he also asked me questions like, what do you want their story to be? What do you want them to do? Like, what do you want these to become? And I didn't really have a storyline for them, but I just kind of wanted them to be sort of like symbols of pride, like that, like I can wear this character and be proud of being really motivated, or of all the education that I've received. Yeah. And so we went ahead and we started that, and we ended up launching last year on International Women's Day, actually, which was yesterday.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
We were like 3 days before the world shut down.
Right. I saw a terrible meme like the other day that said, this week 2 years ago was our last normal week before the world changed.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh God.
I know, I look at my Facebook memories all the time. And I think today was the last day we played our show at La Rev 2 years ago. And it's so hard to believe it's been that long. But yes, I launched it. The show shut down, the whole world shut down, ironically, which gave me more time to work on the Cre8sian Project.
Yeah.
But what I also wanted it to do was have a way to give back to the AAPI community. And also, because I'm a big proponent of education, find a way to help getting access to that education, especially in the arts. And so I have a blog called Amazing Asians in the Arts. And I interview Asian women in all aspects of the entertainment industry, and, on stage, behind the scenes, creators, writers, producers, even people that have been in the arts and have gone on to another career, because the arts played a huge part of their lives. And their stories, part of what's so cool about it is finding out everybody's stories, because a lot of people have a lot of similarities, but they've all had really different paths to get to where they are. Some didn't even start in the arts. They just happen to stumble upon it later in life, which is super cool, because it really shows you that it's never too late to change your life and change your path. And one of the big things that I try to impart on youth is, don't ever let a roadblock stop you. Don't get to a block and say, okay, I give up. You find another way around it, because there's a million ways to get to where you can go, and none of them will be the same, and not all of them are for you, but you should find the one that is. And so from there, I also created kind of like our give back to the community, which we support. We make donations every year to the Peak program in Los Angeles with East West Players, which goes in and does youth arts programming in schools where kids can create and write their own plays or just kind of be able to express themselves. And here in Las Vegas, I work with Positively Arts a lot. We do a lot of volunteer work, and they give a lot of performance opportunities to kids, regardless of whether they can pay or not. And we established a scholarship program here, which is now in its second year, which I'm super proud of.
Wow,
We've been able
congratulations.
to,
That's great.
thanks. Yeah, we've been able to have, I think, 7 students on scholarship, which
Oh, wow.
is so exciting. And so with the scholarship, we give them money, which they can use for training, but we also provide assistance for tuition for any other training that they have. So they don't have to use that money just for like lessons or supplies. It gives them a little bit of freedom to do what they need to with it. So we've been providing like extra acting coachings, vocal coachings with some of our amazing agents that we've been interviewing. So it's cool for them to read about somebody and then have access to them, which I think has been so important. And just even some of the ones that I've taught, to see them blossom from, not knowing that there was anybody out there that was like them to having real confidence now in themselves and to really find themselves over the last 2 years has been probably one of the most exciting and rewarding things that this project has really brought on. One of our first scholarship winners last year, she heard about the Cre8sian Project because I actually did a talk back at their school choir class, because during the shutdown, their choir teacher thought, hey, I'm just going to have a bunch of people in the industry come and do talkbacks with the kids. And she was one of the few Asian kids in his choir class. And afterwards, she emailed me and she was like, oh my gosh, this was so amazing. I didn't know that there were people like in our area that did the things that you do. And this was, it's just so eye-opening. And just, she didn't know that there were so many different opportunities that were available to her. And I think about it, when I was her age, I probably didn't know that either. I didn't know.
I definitely didn't when I was a kid. Like, definitely.
I know. I feel like if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have tried to get here a little quicker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I didn't, when I was 18, I thought what I was supposed to do, when I say in quotes, what I was supposed to do was go to college, maybe do music, get married, have kids, be a stay-at-home mom. Like, that's what I thought the world was. And it's weird because, my parents didn't really like push that on me. In fact, my dad was really the opposite. He was just like, don't good. You?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of tough love for my dad. But, he was always just like, you need to be better. I don't care what anybody else is doing. It only matters what you're doing. You need to set the standards higher for yourself. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's probably why I set the bar so high for myself, is just from years of that being, punched into my head. Be better. Doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It only matters what you're doing. And it's really true. Like, it doesn't matter. Especially when we look at the world right now, the state of things in our country, it really does matter. How can we be better? It doesn't matter that, someone over here is setting the bar so low. Someone over here is spewing hate. The question is, how can we be better? How can we rise above that? And how do we get everything else to also rise above that? And part of that, I think, is just learning how to create your own opportunities, which is a lot of what the Cre8sian Project is. It's creating your opportunities. It's opening your mind to the other all the available options to you, and not letting you be stopped, because you realize there is a whole community that you can rely on that can help you get there. Because every single person that I have interviewed in my blog has been so wonderful. And, it's just, they're so open to, oh, wow, we can network and we can help each other. And what can we do to help each other? Like, it's really, I just passed, I think, 100, my 100th blog feature, which means we're now over 100 Asian women in the industry that I didn't know
so
existed.
Great. I'm going to have to read more of your blog so I can be like, who can come on Producing While Asian?
There you go.
I feel like you've been doing what I'm also trying to achieve with this podcast, which is just being a resource for other people like us, and even people who aren't like us, who are looking for our community. I think that one of the biggest goals that I have, and I'm sure you probably have the same, is to to help beat down the idea and the quote of that you hear all the time of like, quote unquote, I couldn't find them. Like where I'm looking for a certain demographic of people and I couldn't find them. So I'm going to go into the default and, cast or hire someone who's not from that community, even though my original goal was to find someone from there. So I think it's invaluable what you're doing. So congratulations on passing 100. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that was really, really exciting for me because when I realized I got there, I was like, wow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah. But if you enjoy it, right, it doesn't feel like it. You're just having conversations with really interesting people. And then that's where you go. So you talked a little bit about it, but kind of what are your short-term goals right now for Cre8sian? And then, maybe in 5 years, where do you hope to see Cre8sian going, in its trajectory that you're already talking about?
Sure. That's actually a really good question. I feel like I mostly always kind of plan for the long term. In the short term, I guess, like it's to kind of help provide, just like resources, access, and even assistance to students here in the Las Vegas area, the AAPI students, to help them kind of get where they're going. Long term, I would love to keep expanding that so that we can do that in more cities. I would love to help support more organizations that support the AAPI community in the arts, especially because I feel like as Asians, it's so hard for us to even break into this, not just by, casting barriers, but even just with family support, because for me to even be in the arts was a huge struggle with my family. Like my dad was like, you want to do what? And I think he had, because I wanted to be a musician, I think he had visions of me in like the New York subway with like hobo gloves and like a keyboard and like a tip hat. I don't think that he thought
busking on the subway.
I didn't ever think he thought that I could be, a professional musician in a big theater on multi-million-dollar productions, like making a living wage, having pension, health insurance, because it's not something that's like, really common to achieve, like really like to achieve that and be able to make a living, like almost a full-time living doing the arts and music is really tough. And I'm sure you know that too. It's like you have to do a million things. Because one of the questions that I ask all of my blog people is, what kind of weird jobs did you have in between? Because I think that's really important. Because some people have like this notion that, oh, so and so just moved to New York and all of a sudden got cast in something,
became a famous actor, right?
Yeah, they didn't have to struggle at all, and it is so not true. I mean, there were so many weird things that I did, like through college, and like even like once I was even here in Las Vegas, like sometimes I look back, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, like for money, for $13 an hour.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is. And that struggle is real. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that too, because it is part of the process. It's not, this business is not for everyone, but for the people who think that they want to be in it, they should know, like, okay, you might have 12, 13-hour days. You might have to practice, more than an hour a day, which I do when I have to, what do you like? And one of the important things is knowing yourself, like knowing, what you need, like learning how to figure out how to say no and still be professional about it, and really just also, especially after this pandemic, is showing people how to take care of yourself. Because we did a talk back with the Universal Asian about self-care practices. And it's just interesting to see what people's idea of that was before the pandemic and after the pandemic. We think it's like, oh, I just went and had a massage. I had a spa day. I was like, went out with, my friends and we had a meal and drinks. But after the shutdown, that really changed for everyone. I think we all had a chance to really stop and look really deep into ourselves and say, what do we need? Like, what do we feel is the minimum that we have to function to be our best? And so, it's like, now I think about it, there's a lot of things that I did before that I won't take now. And I think a lot of people have found that as well. Like, I'm not going to go and work for somebody who won't tell me how much they're going to pay me, who I had to chase down for, 2 months every time they get my money, who won't treat me with respect, which is, I think, one of the biggest things. Like, we have to be treated with respect for what we do. It's part of being professional. And so teaching those things to young people is a big part of what I want to do. And hopefully in the long term, help those children who turn into adults really be confident in themselves, be confident in what they want, and learn how to say yes to things that are good for them and no to things that are going to be bad for them, and recognizing how to tell the difference and really refining that process for themselves. So I hope that this ends up spreading, like far and wide, and that we can build like a huge community of resources for, the AAPI community, and also, the Asian women and girls, because I think if we can do that and we can all stick together, they can't take us all down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too, like the third tier of all of that, is because in Asian culture, it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, we're taught that failure is bad, that it's really bad. So I think the other thing that we're also all collectively working on is, at least our generation now, is like communicating to younger folks that if you do fail, it's okay, and B, that it will lead to something else that was actually meant for that time, or for you in that time. It's not the end of the world that something didn't work out, or that you were rejected from something, or that a project didn't go as you thought it would, because we just have that cultural expectation that must be perfect, must be the best, must be the top, because that's just how most of us were raised. And so I think it's the effort to break that, I guess it's a barrier in some ways, because it makes people not even want to move to the next project if they failed. They kind of feel like, well, I failed, so I'm not good at this, And I think our community is really working on encouraging people to see past a failure, right? To move through it to the next thing. And so I think it's really important, what you're doing with especially your youth focused efforts. So that's great.
Yeah. And one thing that we also have to remember about, so one thing that we have to remember about failure too, is that you have to fail in order to win. Nobody wins 100% of the time. And I think one of the key things to that is when you do fail, to not look at it as a failure, to look at it as a learning experience. Okay, this didn't work out this time. What could I have done differently? And I think it's funny because when I was younger and I did competitions, I played a lot of video games. Like I had a Game Boy and I would bring it with me to competitions to keep my hands warm, because those batteries would get kind of hot. Which when I think about that, that's probably maybe not the safest thing ever. Yeah. But I think sometimes like playing those video games, like you don't pass the level, you go back, you do it again, you do it until you pass it. And I think that we kind of have to look at, when something doesn't work out for us, we have to just hit it again. What can we do differently? Because, as we say, like, if you don't change something, how can you expect a different result? Like this project didn't work out, this person didn't work out. Okay, what could have happened differently so that I can avoid that this next time? It's the repair or repeat thing. And I think like it's showing people that that's a real thing. And that is really how people learn how to succeed, is by learning from mistakes, learning from failures, and that those have to happen in order for you to go forward.
For sure. And, and just to be fearless, there's a lot of things that can make us afraid, a lot. And especially being people of color, being minorities, be it from, the LGBT perspective or from the female perspective, like there's a lot out there that's like super scary. But like to be fearless of like, I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to pursue this project, or I'm going to, reach out to this person and see if they'll talk to me, about, any advice or things like that. You never know where it's going to go. I feel like a lot of my kind of steps forward came from really beating back that fear and just like going for it, and then, to compound back on what we were talking about, not being afraid of the no or the failure that might come with that and moving through it. So it's, we teaching our community to be brave. I think that's the biggest part in all of this, which is awesome. And so,
for sure.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Voorhees.
And I'm Brian Shaw. No, not the pitcher. We're the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast, formerly a Swing and a Tribe.
Don't have time to watch 162 games of baseball? We do. We have you covered with recaps of the games, stats, and analysis throughout the MLB season.
Subscribe now to Guardians of the Land and press play pods for all your Cleveland sports analysis.
Hey everyone, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. Backed by popular demand, I'm excited to let you know that new episodes of the Hyman Podcast will drop every other Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're going to continue the conversations we started last season and keep having those hard conversations. There is so much in store for you this season, and I'm excited to share it with you. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single moment. The Hyman Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Angela Chan, and this is Producing While Asian.
So tell me a little bit about, in the climate today, that's very unfortunate for people like us. Talk to me a little bit about how Cre8sian is kind of involving itself in the conversation in terms of battling against Asian hate. Because I know representation is one thing, but like how is your organization like really kind of joining forces with everybody in this big international conversation of how to keep our community safe from, what's been going on? Because it's unfortunately, it's not stopping. It's crazy, the stuff that's happening in New York right now. Kind of what if, it's a big thing and obviously we can't do it all, but like what in your piece of the world, how are you able to A, cope, and B, do something productive that, is contributing to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really scary time since the shutdown. And I will admit, like when this all first happened and we started seeing such a huge spike in Asian hate crimes and just like incidents rising, like I stayed home a lot. Like, I think we were going to go hiking, and I think maybe the first 2 weeks of the shutdown out in Valley of Fire, which is, there's not a lot of cell signal out there. And I had a dream, like, I think maybe the night before, that just like, like we were accosted and we were beat up and just kind of left there laying and bleeding. And so we didn't go. And it's really terrifying because, I think about my family, my parents, my dad's not, he's not the most aware of his surroundings, and he lives in Texas. And, I just had this fear that he was just going to be walking somewhere one day or going to a restaurant and something would happen to him. And so it was kind of terrifying for a long time. And especially even now that COVID it's still part of our lives, but it's still kind of dying down. It's like, I still see things and I still find out about things that are happening to people. And so what I try to do is I kind of try to monitor, like, where things are happening, where can we help, what kind of resources can I offer to people who, maybe they need to help, walking home from their show at night on the subway, especially. And, and it's just being able to be a resource when we see things happening that we can say, okay, let me help you. Let me connect you with this organization that I've seen that's been doing things. We contribute to Stop AAPI Hate. It's just being aware and just trying to raise awareness of things that are happening so that we can all, better communicate with each other. Because really it all comes down to see something, say something, if I see something is happening, I think, okay, how can I help that? What can we do here to help make that situation better, to help give some relief to, somebody who may need it, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether we just need to give, support and say, hey, I'm going to have someone so-and-so reach out to you and they can help you with this, whatever it is the person is going through. And so really that's kind of what we're doing here. Like if someone needs to find an organization that, maybe will help them, if they're having to care for a parent or something, or, they need assistance, walking somewhere, we're here to help with all of that. People just, have to ask the question. And sometimes when they don't, if I see it, I'll ask the question. And sometimes I think that's kind of, all we can really do, spread the word, help each other.
I mean, I agree with you in like kind of the early pandemic and even in the first year of it. Like I did the same. Like I have a lot of older family members. Like my mom is the youngest of my oldest family members here, and she's in her 60s. So it's like everybody's older than her. So what I did in like the first year was I did all the shopping. Like I went out for everybody. I was like, you all are staying home. I was like, I don't care how much work it's going to be to like go to the grocery store for all of you. But like, I would rather put myself out there and do that because like, at least I know that if I get attacked, like I can at least fend it off mostly. I was like, you guys could not, and it would probably end up in something horrible. So, I had that same fear of like, I myself was afraid to go out, but I was more afraid for like my parents, for my aunts and uncles that were, much older. So, and luckily, I don't know, it's community to community. Like I'm here in Pittsburgh, and it's changed a little bit, and knock on wood, there haven't been a lot of reports of things like that, but you never know. And it's kind of staying vigilant and keeping like you said, spreading the word and keeping everybody aware. And so being a resource, a guide to resources even is even that is the simplest thing we can all do to make sure everybody at least knows where they could go, to find help or report anything that they might seem suspicious. But in the logo for Cre8sian, why the number 8? Tell me about that.
Oh, because 8 is, in the Chinese world, is a lucky number. We always see it like, lucky 888. And I just kind of I like puns. So, Cre8sian, I thought that 8 fit really well into it. And so that's why that's in there. And actually it's funny because we used to have the whole word, the Cre8sian Project, as our logo. And about a year ago, my illustrator was like, I think it just needs to be a symbol, just something someone sees, like the bat signal, someone sees and knows. And so he made it just the 8. And I was like, that's cool. I agree. And so now it can be something that is easily recognizable for our community. And hopefully it brings us luck.
For sure. And I mean, I feel like it already has, I've learned what Cre8sian is. I think a lot of people that we know are learning about it, and seeing people that we know like Justine Morale wearing Cre8sian clothing, and even seeing men wearing Cre8sian clothing is really, really cool, because I know I need to go online and nab my own t-shirt at some point. It's just a really cool thing, and I think it's something that we need. It's filling a void that, like you said yourself, young women seeing a superhero that is themselves. Because let's be real, we haven't had any Asian superheroes until the last 2 years, with Shang-Chi and Aquafina doing things like that. And who is I'm more impressed with her every time she comes out with a new project, and Raya and all that stuff. So, but even those can be even more specific. Raya was pretty general as a character. It wasn't quite one culture, but Shang-Chi was super specific. So hopefully we're moving in that direction. And I hear Jackie Chan's going to be in the next one, which is
oh wow.
they're trying to court him to come back out of his his shell and do another action movie. But so tell our audience, how can they get in touch with you, with Cre8sian Project? How can they follow all of the things to see what you're up to? And hopefully, if we have listeners out there that are able to support, financially, how they can kind of be part of the conversation and part of the organization.
Absolutely. So we are on Facebook and Instagram at the Cre8sian Project with an 8. So you can find us there. Our website is www.thecreationproject.com. That's where all of our merch and all of our blogs are. We also have contact information there if you want to send us a message. So if you have an organization that you would like us to help support, we have been sponsors for things like the 72-hour film festival film shoot, the Colorado Dragon Boat Film Festival, and just other events that support the AAPI community. And we would love to support more of them. So if you have any ideas, you can shoot us a message there on Facebook, through the website, or through Instagram.
Very cool. And then also, if you want to hire Angela as your accompanist or your music director, do that too. I feel like I want to connect, if you don't already know them, would love to connect you to 2 other music directors that have been guests before. Have you met Stephen Cuevas and Ted Arthur at all?
Oh, I think I met Stephen when he was here doing the festival, because they actually rehearsed in our garage.
Oh, right. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yes. So Stephen, so that's where you guys were. I was like, where were they rehearsing?
They were in our garage because we actually have it's so funny. It was so lucky. The fall before the pandemic, we have a 3-car garage, but my husband is a percussionist and a drummer. So he has a lot of gear. And so there isn't room in our house for it. So we converted the 2-car side of our garage into kind of like a rehearsal space. So he has so much gear. There's a marimba, xylophone, vibraphone, timpani, chimes, everything in there. But we'd also double it as a rehearsal space, which during the pandemic was really nice because we could just roll up the garage door, have fresh air come in, and still be able to do things like rehearse and have people sing in person, which was so important because, as you know, like with Zoom, like the Zoom and singing and music, there is no way to put that all together. I mean, sometimes you're just like, is their sense of time terrible, or is that the internet lag? It's so hard to tell.
And especially at the time when Zoom wasn't letting like multiple sounds happen at once. Like I think it's starting to, but at that time, like you could not. Like you had to be like, okay, well, I'm going to play some notes, and then I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to hope that you heard that and like can repeat it back to me. But the reason why I bring them up is that we had conversations in the last season of Producing While Asian where they want to connect with more AAPI female identifying music directors and lyricists and musicians. And so maybe one day we'll have an episode where I have the three of you on and we just talk shop about the music side of the theater world and how there needs to be even more AAPI representation in that. So keep that in mind. we'll revisit that idea for sure. Do you have any projects coming up in the meantime? I mean, Cre8sian or not, that you want to tell the audience about before we call it a day?
Oh, sure. Well, next month, I'll be actually heading up to Seattle for about 2.5 months. I'll be working on a new show that the Seattle rep is doing called Bruce. It's written by Richard Oberacker and Rob Taylor, who actually live here in Las Vegas. Richard is the music director at Ka, the Cirque du Soleil show at the MGM, and Rob was in Showstoppers here at the Wynn, but he's played in many shows and tours like all around the country and has played on Broadway in New York. They're a brilliant, brilliant writing team, and they wrote Bandstand, the musical that was on Broadway a few years ago. And so now they have a new one called Bruce, which is about kind of the behind the scenes backstory to the making of the movie Jaws. And Bruce was the name of the mechanical shark.
Gotcha.
So,
I was like Bruce Springsteen.
No, but what's actually really exciting about it is the music team. So I'm going to be the associate music director. The music director is going to be Lily Ling, who actually is the first female conductor on the Hamilton tours. And I actually interviewed her on my blog, I think last year or the year before. And so it's super exciting to finally get to meet and work with somebody that I kind of only have met virtually. And so it's super exciting because I think now that we're seeing who like the rest of the team is, there's a lot of women on this creative team, and that's so awesome. Exciting. And it's super exciting to be on a music team where we're both Asian, Asian females, because that I don't know that I've ever worked on a show where that has happened for me personally.
I've never heard of that happening before. I could just be ignorant, but like, you usually hear about that, but I have not. So that's fantastic. So good to have you on this podcast then, because we can say the first, all female music direction team for a new musical that's AAPI. We've had half of the team here. So thank you again, Angela, for your time today. And we'll look forward to keeping updated on Bruce and everything awesome that Cre8sian's doing. And please stay in touch. And we'd love to have you back again to talk more about other things in the future. But good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was so much fun.
See you next time.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We're produced by Press Play Podcasts, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a rating and a review, and send any ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, or to read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com.